What's going on, everyone? Something that I don't think people reflect on enough is the rise of streaming services and that whole transition period in the mid-2010s. It was a super interesting and unique time for music because nobody knew yet how to go about using these new platforms, and in that time, there was a lot of competition. You had the big two everybody knows and loves, Spotify and Apple Music, but in the midst of that battle, there was a third player that in theory should have been bigger than both of them: Tidal. Alright, so the roots of Tidal go a bit further than you would expect. They were a ringtone company at first, back in the late 90s, then they branched out over time, launching their music streaming service in 2010, WIMP, aka Tidal. There's some bits I'm glossing over with that, but the main thing you need to know from it is that Tidal existed before Jay-Z. This is important because marketing and general misbelief will have you and me convinced that Tidal is a Jay-Z creation. It is not. He just bought the company. And because of that marketing and the early streaming era being so small and quiet, information about pre-Jay-Z Tidal isn't very findable, but you can easily glean why Jay-Z would want to buy this. Before it became the big two and maybe some others, the early streaming market was a complete wild west. You had several different services all competing to do basically the same thing, so to differentiate yourself, you would have a gimmick. Radio, social media, there was even a streaming service that had a blog just casually integrated into it. How cool is something like that in the early 2010s? WIMP's gimmick was high quality audio. It was the professional streaming service. And to an artist that's wanting to buy one of those services, buying the one with good audio is a no-brainer. So that's what happened. In January 2015, months after their American launch, Jay-Z buys Tidal for a pretty solid $50 million, taking us into the service's next chapter. So with their new, very famous, successful owner, Tidal's still recent launch in the States would be overwritten by a relaunch with more publicity in March 2015. This was basically the peak of Tidal's relevance, in my opinion at least. Not to get ahead of myself, but this was a really big moment, and I think it signifies both the strengths of Jay-Z owning Tidal, but also why it didn't really work. Okay, so starting off with the whole reason why Tidal was moving the way they were. I have my own theory that we'll get into, but the official reason for Tidal's message and this keynote was having an artist-directed streaming service where one can properly execute their vision and listeners can hear that vision exactly how the artist intended. And the artists get paid more. Now, I'm not going to say fully that Jay and all these people purely bought into this service for money, because one, there are other better ways for them to make money, but also because payment on streaming services is a valid problem. Everyone knows this now, but Tidal was the first to make the downsides to streaming more known to people. Like, that shit really doesn't pay well. So I understand artists banding together to make a fair amount, but this is the worst lineup of people you could ever assemble to make that argument. The conference would get a lot of very valid criticism, both for this and the fact that it's 20 minutes of these billionaires signing their own Declaration of Independence. No, I'm not joking. How did none of them realize this is an insanely bad look? For a visual sake, here's a comment from when this happened showing how rich everyone on stage is, and in the 10 years since that comment was made, most of them doubled their net worth. This comment is grossly outdated, and yet it still perfectly shows everything wrong with this marketing strategy. You're telling me Jay-Z, this guy, all of a sudden was like, I'ma stand up for the little guys getting ripped off on streaming. Like, nah, this is so transparently something to benefit him and his friends. Tidal doesn't even pay very well. It's significantly better than Spotify, but they're both using the same model and pay pennies at best. And that gets into my reason. I think Tidal came about very simply. Jay-Z had meetings with Spotify and maybe Apple in attempts to get a higher payout on their services. That went left, so he bought Tidal. But wait, there's more. 7 months before Tidal was purchased, fellow rapper-owned and new streaming competitor Beats was bought for $3 billion by Apple. Do I even gotta say what that would make Jay-Z want to do? I think he wanted to own as much of the streaming market as he could, and so did everyone else. But controversy aside, Tidal had made a splash. The launch was set with a $10 plan and a $20. Following the live stream, the service gained 100,000 members, and for the first time in a while, Spotify had a direct, aggressive competitor. The streaming wars had just begun. Okay, it wasn't that serious. The streaming wars were a particularly annoying era to live in. Here we're going to go through the many cases of album exclusivity from that time and complete catalog exclusivity. But first, to follow in the timeline, something happened in June 2015. Something that kind of casually blew Tidal's publicity out of the water. Apple Music dropped. Yeah, so to keep everything sorted, Jay-Z, in the pursuit of his own Beats level company valuation, is now competing with the company that makes the device everyone listens to music on, with the ability to outspend anybody in their way. Not good. Once again, this was not the way to go. It makes sense on paper, but on paper, Jay-Z thought that fighting tech companies would be on par with fighting a record label, something that is a bit doable if you have money. But the thing is, music doesn't make money. It makes a lot from the perspective of an underpaid artist, but tech money? Tech money is endless, and Apple Music's launch now made anticipated albums become legitimate bidding wars. What a time to be alive, 3 days exclusive to Apple Music. Rihanna's Auntie, 1 week Tidal exclusive. The Life of Pablo was released as a permanent Tidal exclusive, a move that, while huge for the service, brought back the music industry's favorite threat, piracy. The album, despite being one of the biggest that year, flopped commercially, because this whole business model just makes people want to not pay for music. So with that not really working, the album dropped on Spotify and Apple a month later, basically retracting everything Kanye had just said and provoking a lawsuit. Views was a 2-week Apple Music exclusive. Beyonce's Lemonade was exclusive to Tidal for 3 years before it came to other services. And then lastly, the most important ones, Frank Ocean's Endless was released under UMG as an Apple Music exclusive. The next day, independently, Frank Ocean drops Blonde, which was also exclusive to Apple Music for 2 weeks. This event pissed off UMG so much, they banned everyone on their labels from doing platform exclusive releases. Honestly, a really rare W from UMG here. This trend, while it lasted, was some of the most headache-inducing crap I think we'll ever see in music. And not only that, but literally who does this benefit besides the artists? A lot of albums were available on iTunes in addition to their streaming exclusivity, but I still feel that the average person would just be driven to pirate one of these albums before they buy it in a situation like this. Purely out of principle, I would not want to give anyone my money if they're making it deliberately this hard just to listen to an album. But back to Tidal, this decision was a pretty major blow to their ability to attract new users. There were still other ways to have exclusive content, and UMG isn't the entire music industry, but this was basically it for them. A precedent had been set that exclusive albums are wrong, and Tidal would never really be the same after. By 2017, the streaming market and Tidal had mostly settled into their current positions. Spotify was in first place, Apple in second, and the distant third was Tidal. The end of exclusive albums really did screw up anything Tidal had going for it, because without it, how else could they really compete? Spotify was the most accessible service thanks to its free plan. Apple Music was the successor to the former most popular method of buying music, so they already had a bunch of subscribers from that. And the fact that it's Apple, they technically control the market all these other services live under. And Tidal had Jay-Z's catalog? There really wasn't too much of a reason to choose them over the more popular, more supported services, but they would push on. The last big push Jay would do for Tidal would be his album 444, which released exclusively to Tidal and Sprint customers. That's weird, but this would also be fruitless because it would come to rival services not long after. By 2019, it was pretty clear that Tidal wasn't setting the world on fire. I don't like being this negative, but factually speaking, the service really had no way of overtaking Apple and Spotify. I think even they would say that. So the walls that were originally put up as incentives to subscribe were coming down. In 2019, Jay-Z's library on Apple would be completed, and later on Spotify as well. For most people, you no longer needed Tidal. Numbers time. Just how bad Tidal was losing to Spotify and Apple Music was a thought I had. With how much shit that they pulled, all of these exclusive albums and stunts, what did it do? And the answer is practically nothing. The last user numbers they gave were 3 million, and the highest I found ever since was 5 million. Meanwhile, Apple Music had 15 million within the year it dropped. Spotify, I'm not even going to speak on, we already know. So yeah, Tidal's war was over the moment it started. And you can tell all these artists who had invested into Tidal really wanted out, because the company had changed hands many times. Remember that Sprint bit from earlier? That was weird, right? Well, it was also a simultaneous investment into Tidal. Jay-Z somehow secured $200 million from Sprint, and they were going to put his album on their phones. This seems like an insanely generous deal, by the way. Jay-Z is getting $200 mil for nothing. All he has to do is release the album, and Sprint's going to advertise the hell out of it for free. I don't understand. But there was that buyout, which was the first kind of ringing of the alarm of Jay-Z trying to get out of this shit. And then the second deal in 2021 would basically buy Jay out completely. He sold his stake in the company to Square for another nearly 300 mil. Once again, how? But this was officially it for the Jay-Z era of the service. It was from here on out lacking that original attention-seeking identity, and is now just a regular service, getting back to where they started at. So that's it for the story of Tidal, but now I wanted to try and take a look at the state of Tidal. What community is there? Why they're there? Generally just what is the point of having Tidal over other music apps? And to make it short, there is no point. Tidal is actually in a way dire state than I expected. A quarter of its staff has been laid off since Square bought it. Things are constantly breaking because no one's in control of this thing, and it's really in a limbo state. Their unique quality of high quality sound isn't a selling point anymore. That has become the standard. And beyond that, you just have a basic streaming service. It's the kind of thing where it's like Tidal has no reason to exist, but out of competition's sake, it should still be around. Even with being in a distant third, maybe even fourth place, Tidal still has a decently valuable name. I'm talking about it. Clearly, it could gain attention. So, I don't know. Maybe they can pull something together. Crazier things have been done. Maybe they can pull it off. Or maybe they just go bankrupt. I don't know. Tidal really could have been something great. Jay-Z somehow found himself at the ground floor of music streaming and fumbled it. It's like trying to catch lightning in a bottle, but not opening the bottle. I'm gonna end it there. If you've ever used or still use Tidal, drop a comment and tell me what you might have liked about it or something I looked over. Like, subscribe, follow me. There's gonna be a lot going on pretty soon on the channel. Any updates I have will be on the socials. Stay clouded, guys. See ya.